Bitcoin. You know, when this first came out and I first heard about it, I just thought tulip mania. And I remember having a discussion with someone about this when it was just ripping up and just ripping to highs here. You know, really accelerating back in, when was it, 2014, and saying, listen, this is tulip mania. You know, there's nothing about it. But if it gains some traction afterwards, maybe it's worth looking at. So I didn't participate in any of this and kind of didn't really understand it, if I'm honest. Only recently now have I started looking at it and started to think, you know what? I understand it. I've worked out how it works. I know what the wallet situation is. I know how, you know, the benefits of it, the downsides. And, you know, just a disclaimer, I do own Bitcoin at the moment. But let's talk about why and what could happen to this. By no means am I a cheerleader for Bitcoin at all. To be honest, I don't care if it becomes the next big thing or it doesn't. But it is presenting some interesting trading opportunities. And also, if you're not trading it, just watching it, again, it's supply demand. People do not know how to price this thing because there's nothing tangible there. It's just a digital currency. But the thing that's driving it at the moment, and this is the kind of reason that I was in the trade on this, I've not been in it for long, by the way, on this pullback here after we had the Chinese exchange issue. We'll talk about that in a second. But, you know, the Winklevoss twins, who are real big advocates of Bitcoin, they've got a lot of Bitcoin, are trying to get an ETF through. And the SEC are scheduled to approve or disprove or reject, should I probably say, the ETF application on the 11th of March. Now, what's going to happen if that gets approved? Do you know what? If that gets approved, in my eyes, this is my opinion only, by the way, and it'd be interesting to see what you think about this in the comments below. In my eyes, if it's approved, it completely removes the barrier to entry to getting involved with Bitcoin. You know, when you discuss Bitcoin with people, and even myself, it's just so confusing. Like, what do you do? And actually, it's not confusing when you work out that it's very, very easy to do. But to talk about wallets, and it's quite a nerdy, geeky territory. And actual fact, you know, when you dig into it, it's not that nerdy or geeky. But ultimately, the ETF, if it's an ETF, you will remove the barrier to entry completely. And I believe if the ETF gets approved, this thing will absolutely rock it. Okay, now obviously, conversely, if it gets rejected, you're going to see a fallout. Excuse me, because a lot of people have bought it on the hope that it will do that. So that's one thing to bear in mind. Now, why will it rock it? Because I don't know if you've seen when was it in gold? We had the gold ETF. They have actually, part of the ETF restrictions is they have to hold the physical, or they have to get access to it to be able to offset the purchases. So if someone comes in a hedge fund and says, you know what, I'm going to buy some Bitcoin ETF because it trades just like a stock, easy, I can allocate it easily in shares, it all makes sense to me, I can do that. If you get a bunch of funds doing that and buying the ETF, the actual person running the company running the ETF themselves are going to have that Bitcoin to back up that transaction. There'll be a bit of leeway, but you can guarantee that the SEC is not going to give them much for Bitcoin. So they're going to scramble to try and buy physical. I put in inverted commas because it's actually digital, but you get my drift. And so you're going to see that kind of really, I think you may well see this, a spike based on the ETF being announced and it just completely removing the barrier to entry. Now, the chances last time I looked of the ETF being agreed or approved were about 30%. They seem to be swinging between 30 and 50. I think 50 is a bit high. However, do you know what will happen if it gets disproved? You're going to get probably going to get a pullback, quite a heavy down move. So, you know, it's not a clear cut buy it, and it's a 50-50 type thing. But what will happen is, I'm sure they will apply again the next year or however long. There will be some sort of caveats or some sort of constraints onto what they need to do to get the ETF approved. And there's quite a lot of other companies as well, I believe, that have put in submissions for ETF, but these Winklevoss twins are the most likely to get it. So that's the catalyst at the moment for Bitcoin. The catalyst of removing that barrier to entry and making a tradable vehicle that everyone can get involved in, and that just creating massive demand for it. Or believed to be massive demand, and also improving the credibility of it. At the end of the day, if it's trading on the NYSE or any exchange and you can buy an ETF, that's being put a stamp of approval by the SEC saying, you know what, this is a legitimate thing, it's not fake, it's not good, and ultimately at the end of the day, your counterparty becomes the other side of the ETF trade rather than a Bitcoin person. So it really does make a lot of difference. Okay, let's look at the downsides now. Look at the downsides. The downsides are, as we've seen very many times, the exchanges get hacked. We had the Chinese exchange get hacked here. which caused a bit of a meltdown here, and actually here there was one as well. I think they restricted withdrawals or something. We had the big one, which was MT Gox, I believe. Like I said, I'm not really fully into the whole thing of it, but I think there was a hacking of an exchange and people lost their money, so it's vulnerable to that, and it's not tight at the moment, which is why I guess the likelihood of the SEC approving it is pretty low. And that's your downside risk. If it's disproved and then there's a hack, we could end up being pummeled into the ground. So the risk on this is probably got to be your full trade value. Zero has got to be your risk. You almost kind of can't look at it and trade it like a traditional index. But I'm looking at it as a little bit of fun. It's a little bit exciting. I think it's interesting to watch because it's pure supply demand. You've got people who are so bullish on Bitcoin and so cheerleading for it, and then the other side you've got people who think it's completely ridiculous and dangerous and this and that and the other. And you know what? The arguments for both are very, very valid. I don't side with one or the other, but it's interesting to see the two. So let's see what happens on the 11th of March. My strategy is, I haven't got a lot of Bitcoin. I'm not saying I'm fully loaded into it, but if we do get approved, then maybe ride that for a little bit of a wave, and perhaps then if the ETF becomes available, then it's going to be a really good trading vehicle, one that we can trade in day trade and be much safer as well. But then from a price perspective, if it gets rejected, it'd be interesting to see how it responds to kind of these levels and how much it gets hammered. If it only gets hammered a little bit and starts to hold, then that becomes bullish. It's like this point here. The exchange got hacked, I believe, or some negative news came out. But it was back up above that high kind of a week later, which shows you the bullish nature of, it doesn't matter what this is, Bitcoin, gold, silver, could be anything. And that just shows you how bullish the sentiment is for this product. So watching how price responds to that. Similarly, if we do get approval and it rockets, how does it stay at highs? Does it come back down immediately? Or even if maybe it sells off, maybe it does the push up for a day, then sells off. It's all about price response to news. But all we need to know is ETF approval is supposedly positive, ETF rejection is negative. How does price respond to that? Then we get a little bit of an insight into the true supply-demand nature of the thing. But anyway, I think worth keeping an eye on. Interesting. Some brokers allow you to spread bet it. Spreads reasonably wide. Others don't. But again, if the ETF is approved, then it will become a pretty interesting trading vehicle.